and new recording. Good stopping place here and start. So here we move across the pond to the United States, and we'll start by talking about Gustav Stickley, one of the most prominent American proponents of the arts and crafts movement, and especially through his publication called The Craftsman. Stickley was one of those who believed strongly in the philosophy of the arts and crafts movement and lived it, and produced a furniture line, especially that was essentially handcrafted furniture, which again meant that it was quite expensive and not particularly available to common people. But it became so popular that furniture factories around the country began making it by factory, and it looked about the same as the Stickley furniture, but it was a lot cheaper, and you could buy it at Marshall Fields or from a catalog, and they would ship it on a train, and you'd have it in a week in a much more affordable price. But his magazine, The Craftsman, really helped popularize this style and this, the furnishings and the interiors and so forth. He would have articles by proponents and architects, designers of the arts and crafts movement, and people would read this, they'd love how it looked, and they could at least afford to buy items out of a catalog that looked like that. Here's a cover page from 1914 of The Craftsman, and some images out of various issues of The Craftsman showing what a craftsman interior ought to look like. And the term craftsman, which is a part of, we sometimes call that a style, craftsman style bungalow, that is popularized by this publication called The Craftsman. So people began to associate this style of architecture with the magazine that was promoting it. Here's a photographic image of a living room that has all this natural woodwork built-in furniture, built-in bookcases, and so forth. And you can see some of that craftsman furniture that Stickley popularized. Here are two examples of true Stickley furniture: a sideboard that would go in a dining room, and the famous Morris chair, which is named after William Morris and sort of an homage to him, the founder, really one of the founders of the arts and crafts movement. Stickley produces this starting around 1900, and you can see that heavy, solid wood that is somewhat evocative of medieval craftsmanship, with mortise and tenon pegs and so forth to construct this. It's not put together by screws and so forth. That makes this more expensive. It's still incredibly expensive on the auction market as antiques, but as I say, a lot of factories started producing this same furniture, but a lot cheaper, using screws and mass production techniques. Really interesting, if you ever get a chance to go up on the North Shore to Lake Bluff to Crabtree Farm. This is a farm that was built in the early 1900s by S.S. Beeman. Jens Jensen, very famous prairie style landscape architect, did some of the landscapes. The owner, who's since passed away, but I think the estate still owns it, actually was a huge collector of arts and crafts furniture, like the Gustav Stickley furniture. And all these barns, which are picturesque in and of themselves, are filled with this craftsman Stickley furniture. And the owner even had built a replication of what's known as a Harvey Ellis cottage. Harvey Ellis was a designer working for Gustav Stickley around 1900 and was a very talented designer and later architect. And he designed a typical bungalow that reflected the arts and crafts values that never really got built, but it was published in The Craftsman, but people didn't necessarily build it. But this person here rebuilt it, I don't know, about 20 years ago or something. And this is a view of the interior of it. So you see, again, what Stickley was promoting here with his publication. The other major arts and crafts movement initiative was the Roycrofters, led by Elbert Hubbard. And the Roycrofters was a sort of a guild, essentially a craft guild that Hubbard created that was modeled on the medieval craft guild, the pre-industrial revolution. guilds that managed and organized ironwork or pottery or masonry and so forth. And again, there was a romanticized idea of this. The guilds could be very insular. They didn't allow outsiders in, and so you might have a talent at woodworking, but if you couldn't get in, if you didn't have an introduction into the guild, you didn't get into the guild, and you couldn't be a woodworker. And so it could be very exclusive in that way. And you had to go through long apprenticeships. You were often abused when you were an apprentice and exploited. So it wasn't as idealistic as people made it out to be, but in their reincarnation, like at the Roycrofters, they tried to make it a more idealistic sort of society. This was based in East Aurora, New York, just outside of Buffalo, and Hubbard himself actually was familiar with, he was born and came out of Bloomington, Illinois, but he was very familiar with Buffalo because he worked for the Larkin Soap Company, which ironically was the company headquarters for Larkin Soap was designed and built by Frank Lloyd Wright. And one of his most important early buildings, which unfortunately was demolished. We won't really be talking about it, but it was a fantastic building. So he was a writer. He produced books and had this commune, almost, I guess you could call it, of radicals and free thinkers, and a sort of liberal philosophy of this lifestyle that he felt people ought to be living, which was more rooted to the land and to nature and to handcrafting than to mechanical factory society. This is some of the buildings. I was there a few years ago, took some photos, and you can see the natural stone, river stone work here, the clay tile roof, the chimney on one side. This is the copper shop. This is the interior of the inn, which is still a functioning inn. It's a fantastic place to stay if you visit. And you can see the woodwork inside, the Stickley style furniture and the murals all around the perimeter of the walls. Here's the dining room, has a big fireplace on one side. Again, you see the pitched ceiling with the heavy timber frames, all very characteristics of medieval construction. Of course, medieval construction didn't even exist in America, so this is really a romantic fantasy for sure. Some details of the leaded glass windows and of the light fixtures. And that leads us to Frank Lloyd Wright then, and his architecture. So as I think I mentioned, Wright is for sure the most talented American architect, and arguably one of the most significant and most talented architects ever in the world. And but he was a part and emerged out of the arts and crafts movement, and his ideas weren't necessarily at the root of his designs. The ideas that he had were not original to him. They were all a part of this overall arts and crafts philosophy that was all across the country and was very prominent in Chicago. The Chicago school architects that we had talked about last couple of lectures were extremely open to new ideas and new philosophies about design and construction and society, and Wright was in the heart of that, and certainly with his talent emerged in 1900 as sort of the greatest proponent of it. But like I say, he definitely was soaking in all of these different ideas and didn't necessarily come up with these certainly by himself. So here's a view of Wright as an older man. We're going to be talking, we talked a lot about Palladio, right, in the first semester. Everything was Palladio, 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 or first half of the semester. Pretty much the theme of the second half is going to be Wright, Wright, Wright. When in doubt, you can try to answer Frank Lloyd Wright, and you have a good chance of being right on your quiz. He is an incredibly important part of this arts and crafts movement of the Prairie School, but his career goes all the way until his death in 1959, and he is very significant in the early modernist movement, influential to European modernists, and also really is a leader in the American modernist architecture in the 1930s, 40s, 50s as well. So the influence he has really cannot be understated. So we'll be talking a lot about Frank Lloyd Wright. So what he's best known for, certainly in this area, is the Prairie School. And there's several strong characteristics of Prairie School building or Prairie style. School and style you can interchange. I won't get into the complexities of the difference between them. And the primary characteristics, you're going to usually find a low-pitched roof, not the really steep pitches that we were seeing with Voici and Red House and with even Macintosh. Deep overhanging eaves, horizontal lines. You know, the idea is Wright wanted to create an architecture that was of its landscape. He had strong connection to nature. He believed that architecture should be connected to the site it is built on, which for him was sort of the open, flat prairie of the Midwest. And so emphasizing the horizontality with horizontal lines was a way to tie the building to its natural site. Right, we saw a lot of those, multiple chimneys in the English architecture of the arts and crafts. Wright believed in centralizing a single massive chimney and revolving the house around that. And so he still believed strongly in a philosophy that he called the hearth being the heart of the home, that people would be drawn to that warmth symbolically and almost literally of the warmth of the fireplace, and that would be the core of a family life inside a home. But he centralized it rather than having them dispersed all throughout the house. He was a big proponent of the open floor plan, rather than having lots of individual parlors scattered about, individual rooms where everybody could go off on their own. He wanted a central openness that the whole family was connected together visually and audibly and so forth. We take that for granted, right? Nowadays, we have big common family rooms that are part of the kitchen, and all that. That was very unusual before Frank Lloyd Wright's Prairie School. He really believed strongly in connecting the people inside a house to the natural landscape outside, and rather than having tiny little windows punched individually into the wall, he would have wide bands of windows, so you have almost a whole vista looking out outside the house. And also, often one-story projections. Like the other arts and crafts houses that we were seeing, they tend to meander and ramble out. They spread out. They're not concentrated into a central rectangle or so. They project out into different parts of the landscape. Oh, by the way, let me go back real quick. The term Prairie School was not invented by Wright himself. It was actually coined by Talmage. One of you will be studying Talmage. I believe it was he who began to really apply the term Prairie School or Prairie Style, but it partly came from Wright in his 1901 Ladies' Home Journal article, A Home in a Prairie Town, and he definitely emphasized the prairie aspect of the site, but he never himself said, hey, I've created something that I'm calling it Prairie Style. So before I dig into Wright's architecture, I'm going to stop this recording.